In this video, we are going to be talking about prepositions. So what are prepositions? Well, prepositions are those small words like on, in, by, under, above. These little words that tell us the relationship between two objects. So for instance, in this sentence, this English sentence, the apple is on the desk. The apple is on the desk. The word on is the preposition here. And even if we were to change this and say the apple is under the desk or the apple is above the desk, the apple is still the subject of the sentence, the desk is still the object of the sentence, and all that we're changing here is the relationship between these two nouns. Where is the apple? Is it above it, on it, or under it? So the preposition on indicates relationship, and the word which is following the preposition is known as the object of the preposition. This is particularly important in Greek, and so when we start doing our Greek translation, what we'll actually do is when we get to the preposition, like on, we'll actually bracket out the section, so the preposition and the item that comes after it. And when we do that, when we bracket it out, this section here is actually known as a prepositional phrase. It's the part of the sentence that includes and directly comes after the preposition, the prepositional phrase. Okay, sorry. The meaning of a preposition in Greek is based on the case of the object. So that is the case of the word which is actually coming after the preposition. In this example, dia tu hieru, dia is our preposition and tu hieru is the item that is coming after the preposition. It's the object of the preposition. And you'll notice here that this object, to, we know that oo sound, if you think about your nouns, we know that is going to be our genitive, isn't it? Our genitive. And so that means that the object, the thing which is coming directly after the preposition is in the genitive case. It's in the genitive case. And for a lot of prepositions, the case, which comes directly after the preposition, will actually dictate the meaning of that preposition. So what I mean is that dia, the word dia, actually has two different meanings. So when the Greek word dia is followed by something that's in the genitive case, it means through. Oh, sorry, I've misspelled that. It means through. However, if I was to change this sentence and I was to put tu hieru into the accusative case, then the meaning of dia would change, because dia followed by something in the accusative case actually changes the meaning of this preposition. When it's followed by something in the accusative case, it actually means because of, usually. Okay, but back to the sentence that we've actually got in front of us. The translation here would be through the temple, through the temple. And this here, this section, is obviously not a complete sentence, but it is a phrase or a clause, and so we would call this our prepositional phrase. Oops. Here is another sentence using a preposition, and this preposition's meaning is going to change in the very next sentence. So let's start with this one. We've got ha anthropos meta tu huyu autu. Ha anthropos is our subject. Ha anthropos, meaning the person, the man. Meta, this is our preposition. And then we've got the item that comes after the preposition, the object of the preposition. Tu, huiu, autu. Again, we can see that this is in the genitive case. Huios, huiu, huio, huion, nominative, genitive, dative, accusative. So this is in the genitive case. So because this is in the genitive case, the item that comes directly after meta, our preposition, then meta means with. Meta means with when it's followed by something that's in the genitive case. So the translation for this sentence would be the man or the person with the son. The man or the person with the son autu of him. So the man with his son. The man with his son. However, in this next sentence, heimera, meaning day, meta ton sabaton, sabaton is now in the accusative case. So in the last example, the word which followed meta was in the genitive. Now we're in the accusative case. And so we've got the same preposition, but because it's followed by the accusative case, now all of a sudden the word meta changes its meaning. Sorry, I don't know why this keeps jumping ahead. When it's followed by the accusative, the word meta means after. So our translation would be a day after the Sabbath. A day after the Sabbath. Okay, so let's go through some of the prepositions that you're going to learn Well, actually, you already learnt these in your vocabulary list, but we're going to spend some more time on them this week. All right. There are a number of prepositions that are always followed by the same case. So when I see the word apo, it will always be followed by a genitive. When I see the word ek, it will always be followed by a genitive. When I see the word in, it will always be followed by a dative. When I see the word sun, it will always be followed by a dative. When I see the word ace, it will always be followed by accusative. When I see the word pros, it will always be followed by accusative. These here are examples of prepositions that take objects in only one case. And what I mean by that is you will never see the word apo followed by a dative or followed by an accusative. Apo will always be followed by a genitive. So that makes it quite easy because when you learn apo, you really only need to learn one meaning for this word. Apo, always followed by the genitive, and it means from or away from. Ek, always followed by the genitive, it means out or out of. En, always followed by the dative, it means in. It can also mean sort of in, by, with. It can have quite a range, a large semantic range. And so what, so forth. Sun, always followed by the dative, means with. Ace, always followed by the accusative, means into. And pros, always followed by the accusative, means to or towards. There are, however, words like what we saw in the previous slides, dia and meta, which actually have two different meanings depending on what case comes after them. So these prepositions are followed by two different cases, and the meaning will change depending on whether it's being followed by something in the genitive or whether it's being followed by something in the accusative. So when you memorize a word like dia, you really need to memorize dia plus genitive means through. Dia plus accusative means because of, right? So you're going to learn two different meanings for the word dia. So dia can mean through or because of. Kata, when kata is followed by the genitive, it means against. And when it's followed by the accusative, it means according to. Meta, we already saw, when it follows by the genitive, it means with. And when it's followed by the accusative, it means after. Peri, when it's followed by the genitive, means concerning. When it's followed by the accusative, it means around, like perimeter, perimeter. Hooper, followed by the genitive, means on behalf of, and followed by the accusative, it means above. It's almost like where we get our idea of hyper from. Hupo, these two are ones that students often get confused with. Hupo means by when it's followed by the genitive, and when it's followed by the accusative, it means under or below. So these are words that have two different meanings depending on what case they are followed by, and they can be followed by the genitive or the accusative. There are a few words in Greek that can actually be followed by three cases, and so these are perhaps our most complicated examples. Just put my thing back on. They have three different cases that they can be followed by, and when they're followed by these different cases, it does change the meaning of the word. So the word epi, when it's followed by a genitive, it means on. When it's followed by a dative, it means upon, so it's quite similar. When it's followed by the accusative, it means against. A little bit more complicated, our second example here, para. When it's followed by the genitive, it means from. When it's followed by the dative, it means with. And when it's followed by the accusative, it means beside. Now, you'll notice in all of these examples that I've given so far, we've only had prepositions followed by the genitive, dative, or the accusative. You will never see a preposition followed by something that's in the nominative case. Genitives are always followed by something either in the genitive, dative, or the accusative case. There are some sort of very generalized ways of trying to understand the difference between a preposition that's followed by something in the genitive, something in the dative, and something in the accusative. Look, these aren't perfect categories, but this is what some grammarians have come up with as a way to try and understand why perhaps the meaning of the word changes depending on if it's followed by a genitive, dative, or accusative. So this is what they've come up with. This might be helpful to you, it might not be helpful, but I'm just going to read it out anyway. Genitives are probably the most complicated to sort of get your head around in the sense that they can be followed by words that carry lots of different meanings. So, for instance, a genitive can be followed by a word which carries the sense of separation, away from, out of, outside. They can also carry the meaning of words of position, in front of, before, against. But they can also carry the meaning of other ideas like until or concerning or on behalf. So in terms of the genitive, there's not a lot of ways to sort of anchor down why something might mean a particular thing because it's followed by the genitive. The dative tends to be a little bit more predictable in that words that are followed by the dative, so for instance, en, it means in or on or beside, in the presence of or with. So often when you see a preposition followed by the dative, it will carry some sort of meaning of position, The accusative tends to carry the sense of movement or conclusion. So generally, when you see a preposition that's followed by a noun that is in the accusative case, then the preposition will tend to have a sense of movement into, onto, above, alongside, or conclusion, according to, because of, after which. So that's how grammarians have tried to sort of work out what's going on when a word changes its meaning depending on whether it's being followed by a genitive, a dative, or accusative. As I said, it's not perfect, but it may help you as you try and get your head around prepositions. Now, learning prepositions. Because prepositions carry these different meanings, it can sometimes be tricky to remember. You see the word dia and you think to yourself, well, I know dia can mean through and it can also mean because of, but I can't remember which is which. So I have found it helpful over the years to come up with what I call a mnemonic, so a learning device. So here's an example. I've got my Greek word dia, and I know that when dia is followed by something in the genitive, it means through. And when it's followed by something in the accusative, it means because of. So I've come up with a sentence to try and remind myself that I can sort of say to myself when I see the word deer. So here's my sentence. The deer, right, that sounds a bit like deer. The deer went through, so that's the first word I'm going to remember, genitive. I always do the genitive first because it's the first one in my list. The deer went through Jen's gate. Then the second word that I'm memorizing is because of the shepherd. So when I've got a word that has two meanings, I always put the genitive first in my sentence and then I put the accusative second, and that helps me to remember through, because of. Through is the genitive meaning and because of is the accusative meaning. Here's another example. Kata. Kata can mean against or it can mean according to. So here's a little sentence. There was a cat, sounds a bit like kata, against Jen's fence, according to my mum. So against and according to. I'm trying to memorize that when kata is followed by a genitive, it means against. When kata is followed by an accusative, it means according to. There was a cat against Jen's fence, according to my mum. The last one here, meta, with and after. I met a man, I met a man with Jen's hat. I often put Jen in my sentence as a way of just reminding me that that first word is a genitive. I met a man with Jen's hat after dark, because when meta is followed by the accusative, it means after. Now, I'm going to put a template of this on the Quest page and on the Brightspace, and so you feel free to take this, adapt it, make your own sentences. You might find the sentences that I've provided. Sorry. Okay, let me go to the next slide. And there are lots of other examples, and as I said, these will all be on the Brightspace and Quest page for you, so you can feel free to have a look at those and see if you find these particular mnemonics helpful. Now, for the ones that have three different meanings, for instance, para, the last one there on the list, I have to have a slightly more complicated sentence because it has three meanings. So in para, meaning I think of Parramatta, in para, I walk from Jen's house, that's my genitive, I walk from Jen's house with Dan and alongside the Parramatta River, So I've got from, with, alongside. So from is my genitive, with is my dative, and alongside is my accusative meaning. Now, prepositions, thankfully, they don't decline. They're a little bit like some of the little conjunctions and things like that we've learnt so far, like kai and dia and kai and de and things like that. But they can slightly change their form depending on the word that comes after them. So apo, for instance, if it's followed by a word that starts with a vowel, that omicron at the end will actually drop off and you'll just have up with a little apostrophe at the end. So what I recommend for students is just when you've got, if you've made flashcards or however you're learning your vocabulary, put the word there, apo, but also underneath, I would recommend maybe in brackets or something, just having the variation, just so you remember, oh, that's right, sometimes the last vowel can drop off, or sometimes the last letter can lengthen or change depending on the word that comes after it. Just so when you see something like, for instance, meth, you don't think that that's a brand new word. You remember that, oh, that's right, meta can sometimes transform into this slightly different word. All right, let me turn off this. Okay. We spoke a couple of weeks ago about compound words, and we said, there's lots of compound words in English, things like backfill, uphold, download, and we have the same thing in Greek. We can have compound words, and they will start with a preposition. And here are some examples of these compound verbs which start with a preposition. So we've already learnt the word hupago, argo meaning I lead or I go, hupago, and it has a preposition at the start meaning I depart. And so when hupago goes into an aorist or into a imperfect, which is what we normally see. We have an augment at the front of the word. An augment, you might remember, is when you add something like an epsilon at the front of a word. We spoke about how instead of seeing that augment at the very start of the word, like in this example, it would be something like this. We'd have the epsilon there. Instead of having the epsilon there, the epsilon actually goes in front of the verb itself. The verb itself. So not in front of the preposition, but in front of the verb itself. So let's take this example here. Apocrinomai, when that goes into the aorist or into the imperfect, we don't get an epsilon at the front of the word, but we get an epsilon, our augment, actually before the main verb, which is krinomai. And so that's just something to be aware of with compound verbs, because you can sometimes, I guess, get confused because you don't see the augment at the start of the word, and so you might think to yourself, I just assumed it was a present tense, or I just, assumed it was a future tense, for instance, because you've missed that augment there in front of the main verb itself. What about usage? How are prepositions actually used? Most prepositions are used adverbially. What I mean by that is they actually modify or tell us something about the verb itself. So the example I gave at the start, the apple is on the table. It's telling us something about where or when or how or why the action is taking place. The man went into the church. The man went into the church. Where did the man go? He went into the church. Here is an example in a little book that I have that shows you how adverbial uses of prepositions. So here's our first page of our book. Pu katoi kai ho kamelos. This is a question. I've got a question mark here. Pu means where. And so this is saying, where does the camel live? That's the question it's asking. Then on the next page, we get our sentence that's actually starting here with a prepositional phrase. You'll see here it starts with the word n, and n is always followed by the dative. So n is always followed by the dative, n plus the dative. And so you'll see here that the word that comes after n is in the dative. Te eremo. This is telling me that it's in the wilderness or in the desert. In the desert lives the camel. In the desert lives the camel. And so for each example in this book that I have, because it's asking the question, in this case, where does the hippos live? Where does the horse live? Again, we've got en and followed by the dative. En to hipponi. In the stable. In the stable lives the horse. Just a quick fun fact here. Hippos is actually where we get our word hippopotamus from, because hippos means horse in Greek and potamus Podoma means river. So it's a horse of the river. River horse is where we get our word hippopotamus from. Anyway, so we've got our preposition here, en, and it's always going to be followed by a dative, in the stable. And so the same is true for this page as well. Where does the ichthus live? Ichthus means fish in Greek. Where does the fish live? En te thalassa, in the sea. Again, te thalassa are in the dative, in the sea. So that's the main way that prepositions are used. Adverbially, you can just say, where are they living? Or how are they living? Or, when did they go? So it's telling us something about the verb itself. But prepositions can also be adjectival. And what I mean by that is they actually tell us something about the noun instead of the verb. This is less common, but it does occur. Here's an example. Tein doxan, tein para, tu monu theu. Now, the first thing I notice here is that I've got tein doxan, that means the glory, and it's in the accusative case. Then I've got tu monu theu, all in the genitive case, meaning of the only God. And here is my preposition, para. But I've got this article in front of my preposition. And so that is actually my clue. That is my clue that instead of being an adverbial preposition like we saw in the last example, this is actually an adjectival preposition. It's going to tell us something about the noun being glory. So it's the glory, from the only God. And so a rough translation would be something like the glory that comes from the only God. Para here, from, is telling us about the glory. It's glory from God. From God. It's describing the glory. It's not describing a noun, a verb. The other way that prepositions can be used again, this is less common, but it does occur, is substantively. And what I mean by that is it occurs as a substitute. It stands in for something. So in this instance, there's actually no noun and no verb, but instead we just have the article. It's just got an article. So this sentence here, ta en to cosmo, means something like the things in the world. The things in the world. This ta is just an article. It's an accusative article, accusative plural. But because there's no noun in this sentence, this ta en together sort of act as a bit of a noun, and so it becomes something a little bit vague. The things in the world, or the ones in the world, something like that. Something quite general. But here we've got no verb, no noun, just an article in front of our preposition, and so we call this a substantival use. Again, the substantival and the adjective uses of the preposition are far less common, and a good sort of clue is going to be that there will be an article in front of your preposition. The more common usage is a usage where your preposition is actually modifying the verb or is telling us something about the verb or the verbal idea. And so we can usually answer the question like where or when or how or why. Okay, so here is an example. We've got the sentence, kai ein para tein thalassan. Kai, let me just get my pen. Kai means and or but or also or even. It can mean lots of different things. So we just have to see in the context what makes sense. Ein is an imperfect, so it means he, she, or it was. And was, and now here's our preposition, para, and remember what comes directly after our preposition. This creates a prepositional phrase, and so we want to sort of keep that together. Notice here that tein thalassain is in the accusative case, accusative case. And so I have to go back through my memory mnemonic and I need to think about what I know about the word para. Para. When para is followed by, let me just change my pen. When para is followed by the genitive, it means from. I walk in para from my house. Dative, it means with Dan or with whoever you put in your sentence. And then we've got our accusative, which means alongside or beside, right? It's got that parallel meaning when it's in the accusative. So it would be something, so this is in the accusative case. So para means alongside, and tain, the lase means the sea, the sea. So the sentence translated would be something like, and he was alongside the sea, or but she was alongside the sea, or beside the sea. So we don't have the rest of the sentence, so it's hard to know the context here, but it would be something along those lines. So that's how you would translate and break down a sentence that's using a prepositional phrase.